Welcome. How can we prepare and give an effective presentation? To answer this question, we're going to look at what is the purpose of a presentation. Then we're going to derive general principles from that and use those in the specific steps of making our presentation. So why do I say effective presentation? I say so because a presentation has a purpose. It has a goal. And the purpose of a presentation is to get a message across to an audience. So that sounds simple, but just think about how often we simply ignore this. So imagine I want to present a paper. So I take the content of the paper, put it into chunks, throw it on slides, and then start talking. Sounds fine? Not quite. I didn't say anything about my message. I also didn't think about the audience. So a presentation needs a message, or it needs messages. And these are not simply, so in the example of my paper, the content of that paper, but the messages are what this content means for the audience. And this is what I here distinguish between the what, so the content, and the so what. What does it mean for the audience? And of course, in the example of the paper, quite likely I will want the audience to understand the paper, at least to some extent. But I also want the audience to be able to use it in some way or another. Also, first of all, I will want to make the audience interested in the results of the paper. So the goal is to get the message across to the audience. Let's think about how we can achieve this. For this, we're going to use the 3 laws of communication. So what I'm telling you today is heavily inspired by the work of Jean-Luc Dumont, and he formulated these laws. So he has a PhD in physics, so just as we have 3 laws of Newton, now we have 3 laws of communication. And the laws, as you see it, adapt to your audience, maximize the signal-to-noise ratio, and use effective redundancy. Now, think about communication as an optimization problem. It has parameters, some we can change, some are fixed. One that is definitely fixed is your audience. The audience is what it is, and it comes with the background that it has, and it will definitely not be exactly your background, because otherwise, why would you be giving this talk? So if your message does not come across, don't blame it on the audience, but change how you deliver your message. Stop thinking like a speaker when you give a talk. Start thinking like an audience. Now we have the audience and we have us, and we want to send a message. What could interrupt this message? So that brings us to the second law, and that is maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio. Avoid noise. So the signal, that's a message, and everything that is relevant to the message. And anything else is noise. So if you think about slides, and you think about slide numbers or logos or your name or the date, none of this is really relevant for the message, except for possibly on the first slide. So don't put it on the slide. What else is noise? Weird fonts, unnecessary colors, unnecessary words. They literally take away space from the relevant information. Or how about this? It might grab your attention, but it grabs attention to the animation, not to the message. So whatever you have on your slide, think about, does it contribute to the message? Or otherwise, it's noise and you want to get rid of it. So can we get rid of all noise? No. And for that, we have the third law, and that is use effective redundancy. So we can't avoid all noise. Some noise actually is not under our control, so we might not be able to fully control the lighting. Also, there's the audience itself. So for instance, when I come to your talk, I might be very interested, but possibly I'm still distracted from my previous meeting. What can you do about it? Boost your signal. Send it on all channels. So what does effective redundancy mean? It doesn't simply mean repetition. Let me repeat, it doesn't simply mean repetition. For instance, taking the words that I speak and simply projecting them on a slide is not effective. So you will probably start reading the words, not listening to me. I will continue, so you're not really finished with reading. And then it's not effective, it's actually noise. Now, how, for instance, can we use text efficiently? If I put the main points on a slide, then you can listen to me, and the words on the slide serve as a memory, as a reminder of what I'm saying. And in that way, it combines with what I speak, but also it can compensate if you miss something that I said. But redundancy works best if you also use different codings of your message. So for instance, if you combine spoken words with a figure. And let me say, redundancy is not just about the moment, but you also will want to build in redundancy in your structure of the presentation. So if there's a core message, it should run like a red thread through your presentation. So now with the 3 laws in place as guiding principles, let's take a look at the steps to prepare and deliver an effective presentation. And as you see, quite a lot of work goes into preparing the presentation before actually delivering it. And also preparing a presentation is not simply about making slides. So here that's merely step 3. So let's start with planning our presentation. And for the planning, I first need to think about the setting of my presentation. So what's the audience? What is the background of the audience? How much time do I have? 15 minutes or 1 hour? That will give very different presentations. If I know the setting, then I have to put together my message. So I have to find first resources and look at materials that I want to include, and then I need to make a selection. Because to get the message across, I have to carefully select what to include and what not to include. So giving a good presentation is like an optimization problem. Now let's say we have planned all of this. Now we design our presentation. And I recommend designing your presentation top down. So what is the key message? What are the main points? Which sub-points do you need to include? And then many presentations have a common structure. So you want to start with something that grabs the attention of the audience, then motivate what you're going to talk about, present your main message, and then you'll have the body of your presentation, and finally make sure to have a conclusion and bring home your message. So when we have the structure of the presentation, now we can fill it with life. So now we can make slides. What are good slides? We want to use effective redundancy. So that means the slides should largely stand for themselves and complement what I am saying. We want to avoid noise, so the slides should only contain the necessary information to get the message across as quickly as possible. So what do you put on slides and what do you not put on slides? So avoid excessive amounts of text. Even more careful, be with formulas. So formulas are very difficult to read. So if you want to and need to include formulas, be very careful in deriving them so that they actually contribute to their message and not merely are noise on your slides. Obviously, for effective redundancy, use images, but only those that actually support your message. And think of it like this. You are presenting a message. The slides should support this message. They should strengthen the signal. If they don't, they are noise, and then it would actually be better to have no slides at all. For the slide layout, use non-serif fonts. Don't use too many different fonts. Don't use too many different colors, and carefully select your colors. Make sure to keep things clear and simple. That also means have a simple background, have a clear structure. And a possible way to achieve a clear structure is to have a good template. And then there are some slides that you will want to commonly use in your presentation, like a title slide. You also might want to have an overview slide, but keep that simple. And if your presentation is quite short, you don't need an overview slide. Make sure to have a conclusion to bring home your message, so a slide with a conclusion. And don't have a slide that asks for questions. Now we have slides. Are we ready for a presentation? Definitely not. To effectively deliver your presentation, you have to carefully rehearse it and rehearse it again. It's best with an audience, in particular if it's an important presentation, but you can also rehearse for yourself, and if you carefully listen to your own presentation, this will allow you to improve the presentation, to check the timing, possibly improve slides, to optimize your presentation. And then finally, we are ready to give our presentation, and then make sure to connect to the audience. Make sure to speak clearly, have good posture, face the audience, and observe the audience and their understanding. So not only the audience is listening to you, but you are also listening to the audience, and adapt your presentation if necessary. Now, you might have questions during your presentation. You might simply have questions at the end of your presentation. So for the questions at the end, the typical procedure is you finish your presentation, not asking for questions. Then often the audience will applaud. Then there's time for questions, and then typically the audience applauds again. And when you answer questions, it's often a good idea to repeat the question, so that audience members that didn't hear the question, they know what you're talking about. It also gives you a little bit of time. It also allows you to rephrase the question to make sure that you actually understand the question, and then you give a clear and concise answer. And if you don't know the answer, that is also okay. Then simply admit it. And when you've answered all questions, you're finally done with your presentation. I'm also done with my presentation. Keep in mind that the purpose of your presentation is to get a message across to the audience. And for that, keep in mind the 3 laws of communication: adapt to your audience, maximize signal to noise ratio, and use effective redundancy.